Before I let you speak, can you just say here for all of us, is Coco?
Coco.
No, not Coco. No. Okay, no, carry on. Go. That's, whoa.
Yeah, let's get rid of that photo of me immediately. Well, it's great to be here. I've had a wonderful time in this fine country for the last week. Very gracious hosts, and it's a beautiful country. It reminds me a little bit of where I'm from, which is Sydney. This is my title now, as has been mentioned at Accenture Song. I've been in that position for just under a year, or under 2 years, sorry. Prior to that, I spent 3 years in Silicon Valley with Apple as a VP of marketing communications. And before that, I was the Chief Creative Officer and President of Publicis Group, which many of you will know is a holding company in the advertising industry. And before that, I spent 17 years as Vice Chairman and Chief Creative Officer of a company called RGA, which is very influential because it was 17 years, but it was also helped form a lot of the things I think about now, which I've since applied to these other places that I worked. In all of those jobs, the success of any creative company is really defined by what it believes in, what its principles are. And so that's why I'm going to talk about these 7 principles that I'm now applying to my new position. And it's based on those years of experience with different creative companies, being both on the client side, but also on the agency side, being in a place like Accenture, which is a little bit of both of those things because we're business-facing and customer-facing. And so here are 7 principles that I think about a lot. Now, these are meant to be things that don't change a lot, but they can change over time. Things do. And the reason they don't change a lot is because they become a way to look at new things. When you're doing something new, if you have a principle through which you think about that new thing, then it's a lot easier to figure out why you would do it in a way that no one else does. So those 7 principles are, there's sort of a meta principle at the beginning which describes why principles are so important, which is consistent principles, dynamic practices. 2, singular vision, collaborative culture. 3, loose with ideas, tight with execution. 4, creative needs technology. 5, get to deep simplicity. 6, start in the middle. And 7, to make new things, remake yourself. So it starts from the top and goes all the way down into execution. So I'll start with the sort of meta principle, which is consistent principles, dynamic practices. When I was at RGA, we worked on a lot of stuff with Nike, and I remember when we first won the account, we went out to Beaverton in just outside of Portland, which is where they're based, and it was very clear to me that this big, successful international sporting company had clear principles. And sure enough, soon after we arrived, we were given this book, what they call the Nike Maxims. This is where it came from, the original sort of founding document of Nike, which Phil Knight and his team came up with. And I love how it's typed, you know, and it's sort of weird and inconsistent. But I could tell working with Nike that they still use this as a reference point when they're making decisions. That's definitely true of Apple. I'm sure that everyone in this room would probably be able to guess what those principles would be. Simplicity is obviously a principle of Apple. User first. There are things that you sort of can figure out based on their products. And that's a really important point, which is that these principles are not just how you feel about a company, but it's how you act in that company. It's less about like morale and culture and more about how you approach your practices, right? And you know, this is a document from 1977 by the then head of marketing at Apple. And it's to this day, that was my experience of Apple. You know, empathy, focus, and this last one I like because it's such a weird word, impute. Basically what it means is that everything you do signals what you care about, you know, and it's why when you pick up an Apple product and you see Apple advertising, the care is obvious. There is obviously care that people have thought about this right down to the last pixel. So that all of these principles are, sort of fall out of this one. And then there's this thing which I think is very important. It's singular vision, collaborative culture. We all accept that to be a modern creative, you need to work with lots of different sorts of skill sets. You need to be able to combine with lots of different ways of thinking, lots of people with lots of different backgrounds. But if you do that without the sort of guiding force of a singular vision, then it can be a little bit chaotic. And you know, my mentor, Bob Greenberg, who's the founder of RGA, in his previous incarnation was in Hollywood and doing very famous special effects and title designs. And he made this point, right, which is in that part of his creative life, the best way to think about this principle of singular vision, collaborative culture, is when you get to the end of a movie and you get the crawl at the end of the movie. And there's thousands of people that have contributed to whatever that 2-hour piece of art is. But there's one director. There's one director. And I think especially now, as our companies have got so complex and matrix, sometimes it's just too easy to to lose that vision, through overbearing collaboration and consensus, right? You need a singular vision so that you can collaborate. If you don't have the singular vision, you don't know what end you're collaborating to. All right, so here we go. Loose with ideas, tight with execution. I thought a lot about this when I was at Apple and then when I went to Accenture. And the reason is, I think when you become really good at execution and when you've got a good history of execution and you get very comfortable in a medium, often you'll go straight to execution because there's a playbook there. Apple is great at executing, right? And I used to speak to my teams at Apple about, okay, before we go into the thing that we know what to do, which is in execution, let's be a little loose with ideas. Let's collaborate, let's ask questions of other people. And I think this is true. And there are other companies that I've been associated with where they never end with the loose ideas. And they never get to the place where they apply the discipline to great execution. So these two things are different modes, and they're very important. Start with loose ideas, end with tight execution. If you miss out on either of these things, then you sort of fail. And one way to think about this is when you work horizontally across different disciplines, that's when you're loose, right? So when if I'm an experienced designer working on an interface, I want to work with product people. I want to work with technologists. I want to test my ideas and expand my ideas based on those collaborations, right? And then once we've decided what we're going to make, then you've got to get the distraction out of the way, and you get really deep, and you've got to look at every pixel. Creative needs technology. I've in my career been very curious about new technologies, and I've always thought of new technologies as just another medium. And I've always been astonished by the fact that, especially in advertising, you'll meet old art copywriter teams that talk about technology. Oh, we should be more creative. Why are we worrying about technology? And I have to remind them that they spent 10 years writing scripts for a very specific technology. It's called broadcast. And by the way, when broadcast came along, it was completely disruptive. If you've seen the drama Mad Men, which is about Madison Avenue in the 50s, the TV guy is a media guy that comes in and sits in a corner with glasses, and all the creatives hate him because that's not real creativity. TV is a cesspool. It's all about print. Print is where all real creativity is. And we need to get over this as creative people, just to recognize that everything we do needs a technology, because getting an idea out of your head and into the world needs a medium, right? And I like to use this analogy, like in the birthplace and the time when photography became a technology. When you were a photographer at the beginning of photography, you had to be a technician, because the task of being a photographer was to fix an image onto a glass plate. It was really difficult to do, right? It wasn't until years later, until that technical challenge became so easy, that creative people came in and started to look at photography not just as a technical achievement, but as an artistic pursuit. We're going through this right now with generative AI. We're so astonished by the ability for an image to be created out of a prompt that we're not even looking at the image as anything other than a little miracle. But when we squint, sometimes, maybe those images aren't as great if you don't know that it's from generative AI. So we need to get over the technical challenge and start experimenting, creating a new grammar. So early film borrowed grammar from theater. If you look at early film, if there's a person in it, fixed camera, no editing, no camera movement, it was like theater. It took a while the Eisensteins and the Lumieres and all these innovators to actually come up with a new language called editing. It makes no sense editing. It's not naturalistic. Things don't appear and disappear, zoom in and zoom out. It's a very specific language that is developed around this technology. Every technology needs a grammar to evolve, and the people that create that grammar are not Kodak, it's Scorsese, it's the creative people. They're the ones that dignify every new technology with a grammar. So we've got to just remember, creativity needs technology. Simplicity is particularly important now because we live in a really complicated world, right? The complexity of our world keeps accreting every year, and sometimes we forget that our customers are not experts. They're not experts in software, they're not experts in all the things that we know about. And I first realized that this was actually a choreographing problem. It's not just getting the right people in the room that can understand how the complexity of a problem and then translate it to something simple. It's also in what order do you do that to come up with the best result? And it started way back in 2005, right? When I started to work with my team at RGA on Nike Plus. So Nike Plus, the original Nike Plus was a puck that you put in your shoe that spoke to a sensor that you stuck into your Nano. Remember Nanos, right? And this was before the smartphone. There wasn't the iPhone hadn't arrived. And so we had to figure out, how do we take all the data that's generated from this hardware that shows you how fast you run and compares runs over time, and how do you visualize that in an interface on a desktop? And what I found was we had so many amazing experts assembled to create this complicated task. We had great technologists that did the middleware, experience designers, great visual designers, strategists. We had category experts about running, and we had the people that made the hardware, and they were all there, and their expertise was deep. And we kept asking questions, and we kept seeing new solutions. And there was one point after we'd gone through like 50 rounds of solutions, when I looked at something and I thought, oh, geez, we've gone too far. We're transferring our expertise onto the user. I don't have an image of this interface because it's on a side quest somewhere, lost in time. But it looks something like this. You know, I found something on there. It looked like a bloody financial thing, right? Where there was so much detail and so much density to the information that we were just vomiting out all of our expertise, right? And that's when I realized that this was a choreographing issue, right? What happened was, if you look at every job you do, and the complexity, which is the axis going up, is how much you know about that problem. The more you know, the more you understand the complexity of a problem. And you need to do that because the world is complex. Technology is complex. And then over time, you need to choreograph that, right? And so what you saw with that complicated interface is a team that had stopped at peak complexity, peak knowledge, and then just transferred it. And of course, the trick is to get past that complexity and then start, instead of asking questions and seeing connections, making decisions and making something simple. And then it's ready to be human. Now, you have to go through the complexity because otherwise it's superficial simplicity. And the definition of superficial simplicity is like when you're working with that English planner and the English planner tries to justify the zeitgeist of the strategy based on one tweet they found on the way to the meeting, right? That's superficial simplicity. The world is complicated. You need to understand it. But the people that are good at figuring out complexity are different to the sort of people that are good at clarifying something. The first people are systematic things. They see the world all at once. They connect things. The second sort of people are temporal thinkers. They're not spatial thinkers. They're temporal thinkers. They process things one at a time, and by definition have to be simple because of that. And so it's a choreographing of skill sets. And when we got it right, you get to this deep simplicity. You get the knowledge, and then you get the simpleness. And this is 2005. I know it looks very shiny, very skeuomorphic. It's of its age, just like a period piece now. But importantly, when you roll over each run, the complexity is there. It's just there when you need it. It's a simple thing to understand. And also importantly, it feels like Nike. It doesn't feel like a finance company. And so if I see that interface out of the corner of my eye, I know it's Nike, right? And so this language around digital sport grew up out of this, right? All right, almost there. I know you're dying for a drink. I know I am. So start in the middle. we're all marketers here, and we all know that the sort of classic funnel is not the same as it used to be. There's been all sorts of companies that have talked about how this is different. But the idea that awareness is when you have the biggest consideration set, and then as you go down to consideration and action, then you pare back all of the brands that you're considering until you get to the winner, and then you buy that thing. And why that doesn't really exist anymore is because we've got the world's information in our pocket. And so if I'm thinking of buying something, I might have an idea of 2 or 3 brands in that space. But once I make the decision I'm actually going to do it, then I go into doing some research or just doing a little bit of, I might come across stuff in my social feed. Maybe even more likely, I'll go to Reddit or I'll go to YouTube and try to find some examples. But I'll go to places that are third party, mostly. And why so we have this sort of onion-shaped journey from awareness to action. Now the problem is that when you look at how most marketers are structured, and this is true on the client side and the agency side, if the customer is looking like an onion, the industry looks like an hourglass. So why is this? Why is it looking like an hourglass? Well, it's because we've divided into these 2 tribes. The venerable tribe of brand, where we know how to tell a beautiful story and capture the essence of a brand and put it out there in an appealing way. And then there's this new tribe of performance marketers, right, that are really good at understanding technology and media and reaching people, right? Now, the problem with this is that right now, the brand at the top is making beautiful things that no one sees, and down the bottom, they're making ugly things that everyone sees, right? And we know this because every day that we get served another ad, we can see no one's really taking care. And so the people down the bottom are so obsessed with the pipes that they've forgotten about what they're putting in the pipes. And the people at the top are so overwhelmed with romance that they don't even care if anyone sees it, except for a jury in Cannes, right? So we've got this big disconnect between a tribe of artists and a tribe of mathematicians. Another way to think about this is the top, they're trying to make you feel something. The bottom is they're trying to make you act. The problem with those things when they're discrete is the thing that drives both of these things is when you understand, right? And so I know this is sort of looking like a funnel, but it's really more a series of intentions from the customer. It's less about how we serve things. It's less about formats. It's more like, how am I going to make a decision about something? As marketers, that's what we're doing. We're trying to help people make a decision with our brands, our products and services, right? And so we need to start thinking about reshaping our industry to fit more with how people actually make a decision, right? Which is the most important thing is for you to let customers understand the value of your product and service. And there was a time when we did this before the internet when it was enough to make people feel something, and so we used metaphors, because metaphors are good ways to make you feel about something you don't know about. But they don't have a lot of utility in a time when I can go online immediately and find out something. And so, I'll use Apple as an example because they understood this way before the internet, with the exception of Think Different, right, which was a campaign that Steve Jobs implemented when he came back to Apple. With the exception of that, every single campaign since then has really been a product campaign, right? Now, the reason Think Different was an important campaign at that time is because Apple didn't have any products. He came back and they were making beige boxes that crashed. And so he was like, well, let's get this thing out there until we get the iMac out. And then from then on, every campaign that Apple has done has been a heightened demonstration of that product where you understand, right? So if you start in the middle, you can always do a really high production value, beautiful version of it at the top. That's brand. And you can dignify the bottom of the funnel with a bit of craft, a bit of clarity that is also drafting off the thing in the middle. So if you're working from the middle, it means you need to restructure. We can't be in these separate silos of brand and performance. It's not going to work, right? We're either going to be doing romantic work that doesn't reach anyone, or we're going to be degrading a brand by annoying people, by chasing around the web with a banner because you just happened to accidentally click on a bag ad on Instagram. All right, here's the last one. We're doing well here. I must really be thirsty. All right. This is one I'm going to unpack a little bit, and I'm going to do it and use generative AI as a sort of motivating force here. So the first act of any creative company is to design yourself, right? You need to design yourself. So if you're going to make something different than what you've been making before, you're going to have different people maybe, or maybe just people organized in different ways and connected in different ways, right? Now, one way to look at creativity in the age of generative AI is that we need to get really specific of what do we mean by creativity? Yes, when I was a junior designer before computers, I'm that old, right? One of the creative things that I did was I'd do a thing called paste up, where I would send out for type, get type back, put it on a board, and I'd paste up, line it up, and I was really good at it because it was pretty neat. And it was considered creative. No one would consider that creative anymore. We don't need to do it anymore. So there's going to be a whole bunch of things in the creative process, right? Which are less about ideas and more about execution, right? And that execution is the act of taking an idea out of your head, right, and making it a thing, right? That is a creative process. So a creative process is the space it takes for me to have an idea to me realizing an idea in the real world. And when I was doing Paste Up, we could have one idea, and it might take 2 weeks to get that idea out into the world in a pretty low resolution form, by the way, because the tools were pretty crude, right? And what happened when Photoshop 1 came along, right? Photoshop 1, those of you that lived when that came out, it had no layers and only one undo. So it meant that you really had to sketch every idea, but it still meant that the space between the idea and the thing started to come closer, and I could come up with 2 ideas in a week, which were pretty high resolution. It changed my life, right? Now, here's the thing about writing a prompt and getting something immediately. The space between getting an idea and seeing that thing is instant. It takes as long as to do a prompt. Or there's going to be other interfaces for generative AI, like drag and drop stuff, and there will be other ways to interact with generative AI other than doing a prompt. But the thing that they'll all have in common is the idea will be almost instantaneous, right? And so you've got this sort of really interesting interaction between the idea and the execution, which really preferences a finished product of high resolution. A high resolution, but not very precise, right? So it's sort of a little bit of a surprise every time you get a return from mid-journey, because it's never exactly what you thought, but it's pretty amazing, and we're astonished by it, right? So that in the context of creative process, we're going to have to start thinking more about holding an idea in our head until we can sculpt it with technology, and more about getting as many ideas as we need in editing, synthesizing, combining. So it's more like a sort of post-creative process that we're going to have to be thinking about. And you're also, importantly, going to have to think about a different creative team, right? Now, the last time there was a really interesting innovation in creative team structures was in the late 50s, when a guy called Bill Bernbach took what was then the creative team, which was a copywriter. So again, referring back to Mad Men, Don Draper's in the corner office and he's coming up with an idea. And when he figured it out, the idea is completely formed. He sends it downstairs to an art director who's slumped over a drafting table, who colors in that idea. That was advertising for decades. The creative team was one person. He was a copywriter. And I know there are copywriters in this room that are saying, I wish it was still like that. But then there was this innovation, right? So what went from a copywriter handing off to an art director turned into a copywriter and art director having a conversation. There's a big difference between handing something off and a conversation. What you get from a conversation is you get something in the middle that neither party could do by themselves. And so to look at what happened to the creative world when this happened, we went from a world where, just say the copywriter came up with this idea. The strategist comes and says, Plymouths are being used as taxi cabs. That's our strategy. It's proof it's a good car. Okay, here's my ad. Why do you see so many Plymouth taxi cabs? The answer makes it a great car for you too. All right, so that's my idea. I've written it all up. It's in long form. Send it down. The art director gets it and just illustrates the idea. Oh, I'm going to put a family in a car. right? The thing about this ad is I could take the copy away and I still know what it is. I could take the image away and I still know what it is because they're working in parallel. Then Birnbach created this team of art and copy where the conversation led to work like this, right? There's a synthesis between image and copy that you can't get if you just hand it off because you can't take the image away. It doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. Can't take the copy away. It doesn't make sense. It's a conversation. It's a conversation. Now that was an innovation, in the late 50s. When I started RGA, I realized that in many cases, these little digital agencies were waiting for a story from art director copywriters. So this is the equivalent of a copywriter coming up with an idea. And then they were handing it off and we were trying to extrude it into pixels. It made no sense, So I came up with this new structure, which I called Stories and Systems, which is basically digital designer and a great storyteller would work together in the same way that art and copy did in the Birnbach days. And so you'd get this magic in between, right? And as I was saying before, it's really even more primal than art and copy because storytelling is temporal thinking. It's understanding how to solve problems through time. And design is spatial thinking. It's understanding how to solve problems through pattern recognition and connections and interfaces. And so once you get the best of that, you're not just creating a container, which is what the designer is doing, or something that goes into the container, which is what the storyteller is. You're creating a synthesized set of, and so RGA went through a period where our body of work was characterized by broad execution that was very cohesive. So we did the World Cup soccer spot with Neymar, beautiful 2-minute video, and we did it, and then connected to that team was a team that was doing Beats Music, which was the software that was the main reason I think that Apple ended up acquiring Beats by Dre. So you can see we restructured to create new work, right? So where are we now? We're at this point where we've spent decades where a human would come up with an idea, and the machine would then extrude that idea out in the world. And as we covered earlier, generative AI means actually it looks like this. The human and the machine are working together to create something. But we're at a point right now in this technology that looks a lot like that image being fixed onto a glass plate. So if you put a heat map over all the people in the world that are using Mid-Journey, that's the AI that turns a prompt into an image, then there'd be a raging hot spot over Silicon Valley, the South Bay, right? And so it's no surprise to me that when you look at the stuff that's impressing people in Mid-Journey, it looks like this. There's a lot of engineers that are reliving all of their sci-fi fantasies, right? Now, I'm not saying that this isn't interesting stuff. I'm also not saying that it's not beautiful. I'm saying it's coming from a very specific way of looking at the world. Because the people that are using this technology is not everyone. So everyone in this room, especially the creatives, are going to contribute to a grammar that comes out of generative AI that is not just going to look like what an engineer who's been stuck in their bedroom for 20 years is going to learn to do. Okay, so what are you going to do when you put together a team that can use generative AI in a really creative way? Well, I think the base is very similar to the RGA model of design and story. But because most generative AI creativity is going to come out of this general purpose model. So the general purpose model is one model, all the world's information connected. And then a lot of the why this space is moving so fast is that everyone can use that generative model to do a new application of it. And so translating something from the general purpose model into a specific application is a creative task. It's part of creating a thing. And so that's why we're going to have this three-legged stool, and a technologist is going to be one of those people. And they're going to be creative, and they're going to have a conversation. It's not the technologists aren't going to wait for an idea and then figure out how to extrude it into technology, because technology is part of the idea creation. And AI is going to, be at the center of this, be the sort of intermedia. So that's what I think the future of. But what I was trying to illustrate there is that when you have new tools and you need to make new things, you need to rethink your structure. Don't leave it up to the economy of good intentions and random meetings and sticky notes up during a bloody workshop. Restructure yourself, right? All right, and so here's the other thing I'm gonna end this sort of section. You can restructure your team to be perfect, right? But you still have these intangibles, and this is why the ghost in the machine is never going to disappear if you want to be great creative. Because what generative AI can definitely do is create an endless amount of mediocrity, endless amount of free mediocrity, right? And so if mediocrity is for free, and there's this long tail of content that is on average viewed by one person, who's the person that created it, then where's the value, right? The value is in doing something that's more human, more beautiful, more considered, that takes the machine and turns it into a human, right? And so care is something I think a lot about. Johnny Ives talks about it at Apple. Care. One of the disappointments of performance marketing is I rarely see an ad served to me that's at the bottom of the funnel that has any craft. Can you just kern it properly? I mean, and also, I don't need to see another beveled button in my bloody life. Come on, where's the craft? Care. Audacity. If generative AI models are pulling from things that exist, how do we create things that we didn't even imagine? Well, you've got to be a little bit perverse, I think, a little bit crazy. We need to get back to just being audacious. Play, when you've got 3 people in a room having a conversation, it really works well if you're having fun. Let's get some fun back into our industry. Intent. The other thing about these models is that they will create so much content that you can get lost in the morass of content unless you start with a really good strategy and a really strong intent. So don't go in and don't be too loose. Be loose with the ideas, but not with the execution. And taste. I know. People have forgotten about taste. There's such a thing. It's a real thing. There's such a thing as taste. Let's try to apply some of it. And look, I think I'm almost done. There's a 7. And here's proof that I've lived a hard life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. You know what? Hang on. Come stand over here. I mean, you've come all this way. We mentioned up front, like you were based in New York, etc. But you are Australian, right?
Yeah, I am.
You are Australian. Stand here.
Yes. On the spot, on the cross.
Yeah, right there. There we go. It's got to be in the middle. You are Australian, and we thought that we would get you a gift that's really fitting, something I think that you'd absolutely enjoy. Can you open it up for all of us, actually?
I know what it is. Don't
As
worry.
an Australian, we think that... I mean... There we go. Now, let me tell you something for free, sir. If you put that jersey on and walked around in South Africa, there isn't a single person that's going to doubt that you are from Boksburg. Honestly, you've got the look.
Is that because my head is almost entirely square?
No, you could be a Boksburg mechanic.
Well,
That's what you look like. It's an amazing place, Boksburg.
I need to tell you something, and this is true. I'm not
Yes.
lying here.
Yeah.
So I'm flying to London tomorrow, and then after London, I'm going to Paris, and I'm going to watch a Boks beat the Irish.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Nick Law, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.